El Cybersecurity Nation Leaders Forum ha sido posible gracias al gentil patrocinio de Secnesis, de Cybersecurity Company y Código Verde, consultores de seguridad de la información.
¿Deseas complementar tus conocimientos de seguridad de la información?
¿O iniciar tu formación en esta disciplina?
En ambos casos, el CITI te ofrece el panorama más completo en un solo entrenamiento.
El CITI aborda más de 40 temas. Combina sesiones en vivo con ejercicios y prácticas, así como lecciones en video.
Al finalizar, conocerás el compendio más amplio de prácticas generalmente aceptadas.
Los profesionales de tecnologías de la información que ahora son llamados a mantener y mejorar la seguridad de su organización
encuentran en el CITI la referencia más confiable.
Ya saben hacer su trabajo. El CITI los faculta para hacerlo con seguridad.
Inscríbete y serás un profesional CITI acreditado por el Consejo CI.
El Consejo CI es una organización de voluntarios de alcance internacional y actualmente estamos convocando a quienes integrarán los comités durante el 2022. ¿Te interesaría incorporarte a nuestra organización? Para facilitar tu ingreso, hemos diseñado un proceso que inicia visitando nuestro sitio web. Puedes colaborar desde tu país en cualquiera de los siguientes comités y foros: Comité Técnico, Comité de Vinculación, Comité de Relaciones con la Industria, Comité para CIOs y CISOs, Comité de Mujeres en Seguridad, Comité del Cybersecurity Nation 2022 y Foro para el Sector Público. Te invitamos a registrarte ahora mismo e iniciar tu trayectoria en el Consejo. Esperamos pronto darte la bienvenida. El Cybersecurity Nation Leader Security Company y Código Verde, consultores de seguridad de la información. Bienvenidos al Cybersecurity Nation Leaders Forum, el evento que presenta a los actores de talla internacional que contribuyen significativamente a la seguridad de la información y ciberseguridad. La conferencia de esta mañana, titulada Hacia una seguridad madura, un análisis de causa raíz de las mejores y peores prácticas actuales, será por James Stanger, evangelista en jefe de tecnología en CompTIA. Presento al ponente. El Dr. Stanger es una autoridad reconocida en seguridad, tecnología de la información, análisis y código abierto. Consulta regularmente con organizaciones como la Universidad de Cambridge, AstraZeneca, Target, la Oficina de Regulación Nuclear del Reino Unido, DBS Bank, el Instituto Nacional de Tecnología de los Estados Unidos, NIST, Northrop Grumman y Dell. Es autor y bloguero y educador galardonado. Sus escritos para Linux Magazine, O'Reilly Media, McGraw-Hill y Elsevier se han traducido a más de una docena de idiomas. Ha ayudado a diseñar programas globales de educación, certificación y credencialización en temas de análisis de datos, análisis de seguridad, Linux, navegación en kayak y literatura romántica británica. Sin más preámbulo, bienvenidos al evento.
Well, welcome everybody. My name is James Stanger, and I'm happy to be here at the Leaders Forum. I'm going to be talking today about a concept I'm calling towards mature security, kind of a root cause analysis of today's best and worst practices and how to overcome them. It's great to be here. I've really enjoyed the work that I've been able to do at CompTIA. Again, I'm James Stanger. I'm the Chief Technology Evangelist at CompTIA. I've done a lot of work in cloud technology, emerging technologies, and in security and analytics. I also, before COVID, like to do a lot of travel. So throughout this presentation, you'll see places where I've been. For example, this here is a picture where I hiked with my family in Yellowstone to a petrified tree there, a petrified redwood tree. So you're going to see pictures throughout the presentation. So keep an eye out for them. I'm from CompTIA. We're a global trade not-for-profit organization. We do a tremendous amount of education and certification. We're an education company. We have members, companies as small as the managed service provider down the road from you. We have members who are very large corporations as well. We do a lot of research in the industry, and I'm here to talk to you today about the research that we found. So here's the agenda. I'm going to talk a bit about the eras of IT security that I've seen over the years, and then the research that we've done at CompTIA. Kind of pressing issues for our time, and traditional best practices and root causes that have caused some of the security issues that we are enjoying and experiencing today. And then ways to get out of what I call cowboy IT thinking. And I'm going to talk about some transformational skills and best practices and kind of the war for talent that's going on and ways that we can upskill each other, upskill workers. So let's go ahead and get started. And I want to give you a bit of context, a bit about the eras or epochs of IT security. Well, first, you could start with kind of what I call the medieval era of security, or even ancient or even pre-medieval, because I want to talk today about a question of maturity. And by maturity, I simply mean this. What are the processes that your organization has for its IT? What are the processes that your organization has for upskilling individuals, right? Big time questions, but they really are at the root cause of some of the security issues, because we're not upskilling our people correctly. So let me tell you about a couple of eras that I've seen. You could argue there's the ancient model where there's no technology. Then there's the medieval era where we are using technology, yes, but there's no real model. There are no processes. We're kind of making things up as we go along. That's a problem. And I'm calling that cowboy IT, okay? Meaning we just kind of get on the horse and start riding without any sort of plan. And I've seen this over the years. And so these are pictures I've taken, by the way. There's Stonehenge. I was lucky enough to get there. There's also a medieval monastery that I took a picture of at Reeves Abbey in England. But there's also a picture I want to show you. That's of my dad. He's 93 years old. He was when I took that picture of him. And he's standing in front of a primitive voice device that was just going out of usage when he started working many years ago, over 50 years ago. I bring this up because to me, it's kind of a fun discussion of what voice and what technology was not that long ago. And I think it's really important for us to understand that we've been using technology a long time, but I'm not sure that our processes are as mature and as useful as the technology that we have. The reason I bring this up is I think about the ITU Global Cybersecurity Index. You can Google that. It's an index that basically discusses the levels of maturity in regards to using technology in terms of legal issues and the measuring laws and compliance, the technology that we use. I love technology. I love to geek out and talk about tech. How mature are our organizational processes? What about capacity and our ability to actually provide true, meaningful tech to bring the capacity for business, for businesses and organizations, governments, not-profits, for-profits to do their business? And how well are IT departments and security industry people able to cooperate with those business units? It's a question of maturity. And what I find is that there are a lot of security issues that we're seeing that I think can be tied into a nice little bundle around this idea of cowboy IT. And I'm not using cowboy IT as a good thing. It's kind of a bad thing. Let me explain. So first of all, there are 4 major security issues that seem to be popping up all of the time. The first is the idea of the advanced persistent threat. This is the sneaky attack. This is the person or group that is lurking in your systems for weeks, months, maybe years, okay? They're working below the radar, and then they're causing havoc. They steal data, they alter data, but you don't know they're there. Second one, ransomware. Well, that's obvious. You know it's there when your system gets taken over. And I've worked with people in the state of Colorado, in Europe, in Japan, who've all worked and had problems with ransomware. This third problem is the idea of supply chain attacks. This is much more complex because it has to do with the idea of a partner of yours or some system of yours that you weren't quite aware of gets attacked and then poisons the food chain along the way. The fourth big issue, distributed denial of service attacks. We're seeing this in various issues. We've seen that in the attacks with Russia and the Ukraine, for example. Those are 4 major issues of our time. But it really comes down to the maturity of our processes, how we're able to manage, how we're able to communicate, how we're able to upskill our employees, and your architecture. So there are a lot of these metrics that the IT uses to assess the risk level or the maturity level, 2 different ways to look at it, of various parts of the world. And they've broken things down into Africa, the Americas, Arab states, Asia, Europe, and elsewhere. And notice that the Americas, we've got work to do. In North, Central, and South America, we all have work to do. So let's talk about how we can overcome some cowboy IT problems. One of the first issues is we are not upskilling our people correctly. How do we get the right people? Well, traditionally, in a cowboy IT world, what do? You just steal talent from the other team, from another business, okay? Hopefully, though, you build your own. One of the best ways to overcome cowboy IT is to build your own talent. But most organizations don't have clear answers. They don't have a mature set of processes, and they don't have a mature perspective that allows them to properly upskill their people. So part of the cowboy IT mentality is, well, I just got to spend more money or do nothing even in regards to security. And that is leading to some of these core issues that we're having. Well, let me tell you more about what I'm seeing with cowboy IT and how we got here, okay? First of all, let me define it a little better. Cowboy IT is characterized by 3 or about 5 really fundamental issues. First, you're not using modern practices correctly. Now, there are reasons for that. 1, you may not be able to afford it. 2, you don't have the time or you don't have the talent to use them. But we're also relying on older technologies and older approaches. We're still based on a firewall-centric perspective rather than a zero-trust perspective, for example. We're not doing monitoring. Whether it be the old SolarWinds problem, what we're seeing in terms of issues with later attacks with Colonial Pipeline, all these things, it's monitoring that can help us. There's no magic bullet. There's no silver bullet that will get us out of our problems, but monitoring is very important. We're also seeing no business buy-in to security, traditionally. In some areas that's improving, but we're still seeing how security is being seen as a cost center, or those people who just say no all the time. So business leaders kind of avoid it, or they only talk about it after a project begins, or even after it's ended. That's a problem. And then upskilling people is a problem because we're not seeing proper talent upskilling. And that's a major symptom of cowboy IT. So in other words, we're seeing their IT departments worldwide have been doing these things for the last 30 years, and it causes some of the issues, many of the issues that we're seeing. Additional elements of cowboy IT is that IT sometimes is not being used properly, and that leads to major issues, okay? There are so many CISOs that I've spoken with over the last few months, and they basically have said, I see the attacks that are happening to other people. The same thing can happen to me. I need to mature my processes. So IT can run into problems where it kind of takes on a cowboy IT perspective. First of all, because they're not monitoring. Second, because they have to deploy technologies very rapidly. Things are changing so quickly that we run into these issues where, well, I've got to get this technology going to solve a business problem, and security kind of falls by the wayside. We're also not educating our end users properly. Our management of IT workers is a bit problematic, and we're seeing evidence, strong evidence of IT burnout, both in security workers and IT workers. We're also not seeing companies do a good job governing their compliance to issues. Many of you, I'm sure, are PCI compliant, or you have to be compliant maybe if you do work with Europe with GDPR, or in California, CCPA, various standards. But we're seeing governance lagging, okay? It's an issue. We're also seeing organizations not use cybersecurity threat intelligence well. They may belong to a cybersecurity, a CTI, threat intelligence organization, but once they get that information, they don't quite have the wherewithal, the ability to take that information and then distribute it to the organization. You either don't understand some of the issues that are coming about, some of the discussions, or you don't have the organizational muscle memory to take that information and then make some changes. These are some of the reasons why cowboy IT happens. There are the big three factors of cowboy IT: technical debt, shadow IT, and the lack of governance. I've already talked about the lack of governance, but let me talk a bit about technical debt. Technical debt is simply this. Each time you deploy a technical solution, but you skip a step along the way, you incur a technical debt. Let's say, hey, we don't have time to do a security audit on this prototype right now. We just got to get it into production because we had to do it yesterday. You've skipped a step, and that incurs a debt. And we all know what happens when you get into debt. You have to pay it back, right? If you have your home or something that you've bought and you don't pay it back, well, you get your home repossessed, or you get evicted, or whatever. Technical debt is much the same way. Programmers have used the concept of technical debt to describe what happens when they skip a feature or go quickly over something. Then they have to fix it later. But what happens with organizations is they incur technical debt, and then basically hackers come along and repossess the company, as it were. They take over the company. So too often, as part of cowboy IT, we incur technical debt. Shadow IT is the idea that organizations source their own IT solutions. So for example, let's say you have a research department and a sales department and an IT department. So a shadow IT happens when the sales department, let's say, sources its own IT solution and does not inform IT. Some people see shadow IT as an okay idea. I see it as a problem, because if the IT department and the security folks do not see a particular business solution, then they can't help secure it. These things cause problems, and these are the things that cause problems with supply chain attacks. And in many ways, it contributes to cowboy IT, where, if you want to quote Woody in Toy Story, somebody's poisoned the water hole. Okay, so the idea of cowboy IT is a real problem. The old models, the idea of, well, let's focus on what's outside the network and what's inside. That's an old idea, the ingress-egress idea. Yes, it's still relevant, but it is not as relevant as understanding, well, the cloud is always outside the firewall, isn't it? Workers are now working remotely. We all know this. So thinking differently about how to monitor traffic, and I'll get into that more in a little bit. Governance is an issue, and also thinking about Insider threats. Well, that's fine. We all know insider threats are an issue, but let's think more in terms of the threat in general, regardless of whether it's inside or outside. So the result of not having these mature processes, of having cowboy IT, is where you have issues with privacy. So you end up with compliance issues. You have attacks that happen. The idea of ransomware coming, because ransomware is a form of the hackers coming in and repossessing some sort of asset of yours that you have technical debt on. So all of these things result in a kind of a toxic IT. And we also have to think in terms of the code that we implement and the complexity and the monocultures that we tend to bring into our organization. By monocultures, I refer to many similar devices. So IoT devices, you use thousands of them. They're all similar. How susceptible are they to some sort of attack, whether it be DDoS or some sort of virus or worm or whatever? So these are the issues that we have to think about to overcome toxic IT or to overcome cowboy IT. So let me give some more context about what we do increasingly as security workers and the research that CompTIA has shown. So first of all, we are not information custodians necessarily. We're information curators. More and more, we are being asked as IT professionals or as security professionals to kind of combine privacy issues and security issues. Many times that's driven by laws that we have to comply to, laws that are local to Mexico, laws that are worldwide, or that there are standards that are global standards. For example, ISO 27000X, for example, or PCI DSS. We need workers that are not just people who put security controls in place, but who understand the data that they're securing. This means that we need information curators, and we have to provide knowledge workers that are security workers that understand the impact of the security controls they put in place. So we are not just guardians of systems. We're not even just guardians of data or information. We now, as security workers, are guardians of identity, of information, of the privacy of individuals. By the way, that is a rock called Boxing Glove Rock. See the little, kind of looks like a fist there. I thought that was kind of interesting in terms of security. That's a place I hiked to in England, was able to take that picture. That was a lot of fun. But we are guardians. So how do we go about doing that? Well, let's see what it means to move from cowboy IT into what I call the postmodern period. So here are the essential skills. And the first one has to do with monitoring, and that's a lighthouse that I like to go to on the Oregon coast, which is near me. I live in Seattle, Washington. And that's a lighthouse that I like to go to. And I like the idea that it's a beacon, but it's also something that helps monitor conditions. Now, we all know about the idea of getting actionable information. We get that from various places, from cybersecurity threat intelligence. For example, at CompTIA, we have an information sharing organization, an ISAO, that does that. We also can get security analytics information from intrusion detection systems, from logging, from SIM tools, etc. There's vulnerability assessment that is often done using scanners like Nessus or OpenVAS, or using somebody to conduct an audit or a pen test, right? All of that, that's another key resource that can help provide actionable information to us. AI increasingly is not just going to be used, it's now being used as a way to suggest problems and to do monitoring. And getting trending information, not only from the news, but also from artificial intelligence. This gives us the actionable information that we want. And one of the struggles is, well, which tool can I use? Because it seems to be very expensive to implement a SIM, or it's too expensive to hire the people to run a SIM or to run CTI. Well, I beg to differ, because to get the accurate narrative and the actionable information that we need, I would argue that if we properly upskill individuals and then choose cost-effective solutions, we can get this done. So this is kind of what I call the Security Operations Center 2.0. Instead of doing expensive things, we do what we can do to get out of the cowboy IT mentality. That means we can use cybersecurity threat intelligence. There are very good resources available from various resources. I suggest you look into them. But more important, we need individuals that can look for patterns, that can do normalization of data. And so the idea of a security operations center, whether you create one yourself or if you have it rented from somebody, from a good organization, they can do the analytics for you. So I would argue that you need better monitoring and analytics because we have distributed workers these days. We have so many different elements because the IT world has largely changed. So this is a very busy little chart here, or a very busy little slide here, but I want to point out that we need good security analysts to help organize this data and help lead an organization out of a cowboy IT mindset. So a little bit more about monitoring. By the way, this is a picture that I took while I was at that one lighthouse. I walked down to the beach and I was taking pictures, and I was so busy taking pictures, I didn't notice that a wave was coming in, and it came in and knocked me over. You can see there's the wave coming a little bit closer, getting stronger, and then that's me getting knocked over by the wave. I bring this up as an example because I think so often as security workers, as CISOs, as CIOs, it's so important for us to monitor, analyze, and visualize trends. We tend to get so involved in things, we don't see things happening to us. We don't see the trend coming to us. So we asked at CompTIA, doing in our research of organizations worldwide, we said, what are some of the most important solutions that security professionals provide? And here's the answer. You can see from this little bar chart here, security monitoring is the #1 choice. Okay, there are others, but I found it interesting that security monitoring was seen as so important. And so I just want to point out that that's why I've been talking about monitoring as a way of getting out of cowboy IT. Because notice the second one, incident detection and response. Well, incident detection in many ways is monitoring. It's really the same thing. And if you take a look at other things such as threat intelligence, about the 5th, 6th one down, and threat modeling, all of those things have to do with implementing monitoring. So it's a major issue. There are other solutions that I'm going to talk about, including pen testing, security analytics, and zero trust. But I want to focus right now on the monitoring idea. Take a look at this little picture I took while I was at Grand Teton National Park in the United States. You'll notice in the middle there, there's a grizzly bear there. Okay, that grizzly bear was eating the bugs off of that downed tree. And I couldn't help but think while I was taking that picture of a couple of things. One, first of all, that the bear came and kind of stood up and started looking at me, and I realized I was way too close because I had actually run towards the bear to take a picture. So the first thing that went into my head was to get out of there as soon as possible. But the second thing I noticed when I was running away and thought about was that bear in many ways can be seen as a threat actor, either me or the bear. But if the bear is a threat actor, right, like a hacker, notice what that bear was doing. It was eating bugs. It was living off of bugs that were on a distressed resource. In this case, the distressed resource was a tree. Okay, so it was eating bugs that were living off of that tree, that dead tree. Well, in many ways, hackers do the same thing, don't they? They go in, they find a distressed resource, something that is a resource that's probably the result of technical debt, and they live off of that. That's what hackers do. So I couldn't help but think of that as what security analysts do, okay? Because that is what they do. The second thing that analysts do is they look for patterns. And this is a picture I was able to take when I was flying. I can't remember where I was flying to. I think it was Washington, D.C. And this is near my home in Seattle. This is I'm taking off from the flight. And the reason I bring it up is that usually it rains a lot in Seattle, okay, in my area. So it's very tough to get a good view of all of these mountains. So you're looking at several volcanoes, right? The biggest one there is Mount Rainier. There's one just to the left in that picture. That's Mount Adams. To the right is Mount St. Helens, the one that blew up back in 1980. And then way behind it, you'll see Mount Hood. The reason I bring this up is that security analysts are supposed to visualize things, right? Visualize threats. In this case, you could argue volcanoes, right? But they also discover patterns. In the Pacific Northwest, if you're lucky enough to get on a plane on a sunny day, you can see this pattern. And Pacific Northwesterners, we call it RASH, R-A-S-H, for Mount Rainier, right? Mount Adams, Mount St. Helens, and Mount Hood. Those are the volcanoes. Security analysts are supposed to create patterns and identify patterns. They get data feeds from the clouds. They do packet captures from intrusion detection tools. And then they slice and dice that information and visualize it. That's their job. So this here is the ELK stack, the elastic stack. It's a tool designed to help visualize data. And you can use it to visualize any amount of data. In this case, I've visualized a series of distributed denial of service attacks. What we need to get out of Cowboy IT is to capture, slice and dice, and visualize data that tells a story, that has a narrative to it, that allows organizations to protect themselves so that they can anticipate and identify proactively a lot of security attacks. Okay, that's kind of the goal. This way, when you hear in security about, well, we need security workers to identify pivot points. In other words, how hackers move from one resource to the next, or the steps that they take when they attack systems. That's what we're talking about, the idea of being able to visualize the hacker lifecycle, from reconnaissance to weaponization to actually delivering that weapon and penetrating and exploiting a system and installing additional hacking tools and things like that to achieve command and control. This is what we look for as security analysts. This is the MITRE model that talks about how hackers do initial recon all the way through to escalating privileges and attacking systems. I'm bringing this up because we need security analysts to understand how to do these pivot points. In this case, you're looking at another model called the diamond model that's designed to show the capabilities of the adversary and also the infrastructure being attacked by the victim. And the idea of this model is that it makes it possible for artificial intelligence, but also individuals, to identify the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures that attackers take. Okay, so what tools are they using? How are they using the tools? And then what particular ways are all of these things being tied together? We need security analysts who can identify that. That will solve a lot of our problems. Okay, won't solve them all, right? There's no one thing that's going to solve anything, but is probably the first step that can help you really get out of a cowboy IT mentality. I suppose the first step is really creating a good security policy, but right after that, monitoring. So there's a dynamic when it comes to monitoring, and I think that's very important. And it's what I call the red team, blue team dynamic. And I would argue it's kind of the nucleus, as it were, the dynamic duo of security. And it involves the red team and the blue team. And so let me explain. If you already know this, forgive me, but I want to make sure I cover this, because we all know that pen testing exists and it's important. That's fine. But why do you do pen testing? Well, there's compliance reasons. I have to because my security standards tell me to, or my boss tells me to, or the government tells me to. It's fine. But really, the reason why you have a red team is to improve the listeners, to improve the blue team. Because the red team goes in, generates noise, acts like hackers, right? And then the security analysts listen very carefully. And they go, okay, now I know what to listen for. And they know how to then choose or improve existing security controls so that they're monitoring the right things. So in many ways, the blue team is more important. The analysts are more important because they use the pen testing information to improve security. It's a team, right? So the pen testers create the indicators of compromise. The security analysts then improve the team. So let me talk about vulnerability assessment and pen testing as part of that, creating that noise. Right? It can be 3 different activities or even 3 different job roles. Usually companies aren't big enough to hire their own pen testing team or their own security analyst. They hire it in. But and when it comes to pen testing or red teaming, there are various hats that a red teamer will put on. So the first is a pen tester, where they identify a specific weakness in a VPN tool or device or a workstation or a mobile phone, and they take advantage of that, and then they say, well, here's the problem that we had, and then they inform the blue team. Well, the red team does a little bit more than that. Often what they do is they look for the entire enterprise, not just one specific issue, but they look at the entire organization and they follow the entire kill chain. They use those tactics, techniques, and procedures, and they follow an entire kill chain, as it were. And the reason I bring this up is because red teamers are very good at identifying various weaknesses. They can look for very exotic or very unusual problems that most people would overlook and then take advantage of them. Vulnerability analysts are people who use things like Nessus and vulnerability scanning tools like OpenVAS and others. So that's their job. So those are the three elements of a security auditor or a pen tester, or what they call a red team. When it comes to security analytics, there's so many analytics that have been out there for years: business intelligence, web analytics. Well, security analytics takes the data from the pen testers and looks for important, unique information and other information that can help executives and IT professionals better position security controls. This dynamic is very important for getting out of that cowboy IT sort of mentality. Now, there's automation, very important to think about, because it helps overcome repetitive tasks. Many times IT teams get overwhelmed, and it's the smart use of automation, artificial intelligence or Ansible and Docker, that can help us improve our security. That's another element that can help us get out of kind of that cowboy IT model. Well, let me talk for a second about zero trust and governance, because these are very important elements moving forward. I think in time, the idea of zero trust will just be seen as, well, that's how we do networks. But right now, zero trust is often used as a catchphrase, hopefully not a buzz phrase, but a catchphrase that helps organizations realize they need to change their architectures. So let me explain. Let's see, not too long ago, I was able to take a walk in downtown London in one of its parks. I think it was Hyde Park where I was. And I noticed this sign. You can see the sign where it's from the Royal Parks, and it says, "Caution, thieves operate in this area." And that started getting me to think about zero trust, right? Because you can't trust anyone. I think this has a lot to do with the idea of zero trust, because, again, there are too many people that still think in terms of, well, if I'm in a trusted network, then I'm okay. With zero trust, you treat everything as the enemy, even the network. There is no trusted network. I was talking to a person, her name is Mariana Pereira. And Mariana was talking about, she said, with all that's happened over the last year or two in terms of COVID, for example, I think we finally have killed off the idea of the perimeter. And I think that's really important to think about, because there is no trusted zone anymore. I mentioned it earlier a little bit, but the idea, if we're using the cloud, I mean, obviously the cloud in many ways is no longer existing inside of the local firewall. So firewalls can still be important, obviously still important, but things have changed. That idea of perimeter has completely changed, but I'm not sure that today's organizations are properly reacting. So long before COVID, we've seen a movement to zero trust. And of course, it has accelerated. So let's talk a bit more about what zero trust really means, okay? Because it's an architecture being used now. It's not a future thing. It's happening right now. So in order to do zero trust, it's really more of an approach for at least 6, and I would argue even 8 major areas. And here are those areas. So the first area in implementing zero trust is you have to have really good data and information. You have to collect it. And so log and data aggregation is really important. But the second thing, the other element there is that you have to have proper visibility of those logs. This is why I talked for so long about the importance of analytics. Because if you don't have the right logs and you're not visualizing them correctly, then you're not going to see that next attack coming, all right? So that's very important. Now, the second element has to do with strong analytics. And this is where it can be kind of controversial. Starting a few years ago, I'd say about 4 or 5 years ago, the idea of the SIEM, SIEM, right, the Security Information Event Monitoring Tool, was, in my opinion, oversold. SIMs are very important. They can be very important. But the problem is they take so long to create. And they take so long to condition, traditionally anyway. And so a lot of organizations have backed away from that. And as a result, not only did they back away from the use of a SIM, but they backed away from monitoring altogether. That's a problem. There are ways in which you can get solid monitoring going without doing a full-blown expensive SIM. There are managed service providers, managed security service providers that can do a great job for you. So there's a lot of endpoint detection that can happen. There are so many companies out that do strong endpoint detection and monitoring tools. Take a look at those, because these are the things that will help you get out of cowboy IT, but also implement the second element of zero trust. The third one, continuous diagnostics and mitigation, CDM. In other words, continual monitoring not only of a network host or a user account, but of processes, of application programming interfaces. That kind of continuous diagnostics is very important. Many products today exist that allow you to make this happen. But it's very important that you have that element going. The idea of user behavior analytics, that's usually not done by an individual as much. There are automated tools that do a lot of the analytics and then report to an individual who then makes smart choices. The fifth element has to do with automating response. People use that fancy term, security, automation, and orchestration. I'd like to see it in a bit simpler terms. So many of the attacks that we see, they may have exotic beginnings. They may have very detailed and unusual things, beginnings, but the end result, right? The end result and your response is something that is actually fairly typical once you know the origin. My point is that it's easy, in a sense, to automate good responses once you know an issue is happening. Once you have that blue team and red team dynamic, you can then start automating the more repetitive tasks. That sounds impossible. It's not as impossible as you think. Once you have that good blue team, red team dynamic going. The sixth element has to do with governance and compliance. And this has to do with an awareness of what you're complying to. You could say, well, we comply to our security policy. That's fine. That's great. Okay. But how aware is your security policy of the various standards, government standards, various industry standards that you need to conform to? So none of these previous things that I've talked about, data log analytics, SIM tools, diagnostics and monitoring, are going to be very useful to you unless you have your security policy and your GRC mindset set up correctly. And this is where I think the seventh element is very important. Kind of a culture change, a policy change that helps you get out of that helps you get out of cowboy IT. I think it's very important. The eighth element has to do with visualization and bringing context. So when it comes to zero trust, those are the elements that are so important. Let me take a step back and talk about an analogy that I like to use when it comes to zero trust. I think all of us have seen zombie movies before, right? You know, like 28 Days Later or Night of the Living Dead or Shaun of the Dead or all these zombie movies out there. Well, what is a truism of a zombie movie? Well, the truism is that anybody can become a zombie at any time, right? That's one of the common things. You know, yeah. Unfortunately, your best friend standing right next to you can become a zombie, right? Why? Because there's no trusted place, okay? There's no trusted zone, really. Or if you do establish a trusted zone, it gets invaded very quickly by zombies. We've all seen this in zombie movies. What does that have to do with zero trust? A lot. Because in zero trust, you can't even trust applications that you use. You can't trust a user. You can't trust a computer because it can turn on you at any time. So in many ways, today's IT world is kind of like living in a zombie movie. Zero trust, right? The concepts of constant monitoring, constant log analysis, automated response can help you get out of that zombie movie issue, right? That zombie movie lifestyle that so many IT workers find themselves in, and can get you out of the cowboy IT kind of world. When it comes to the cloud, I want to focus on this just a little bit. I've had conversations with people who say, well, James, now that we've moved our applications from the server room or from the data center into the cloud, well, it's changed everything, hasn't it? I'm like, well, not really. The application stays the same, but now it's running on Azure or Amazon or in Alibaba Cloud or wherever. I think it's very important to think of it this way. We do live in a cloud-first hybrid world. So applications will live in the cloud, obviously, but they'll also live in data centers. I know so many organizations that still use data centers. I was talking to a friend of mine who works over at AstraZeneca, and he works with data centers all the time, cloud all the time, and he also works with good old-fashioned installed servers that are installed in a server room. So we live in a cloud-first hybrid world where we live with the cloud, with data centers and servers. The reason I bring this up is that if we think in terms of the cloud, I think it's less useful to think in terms of cloud and more useful to think in terms of applications, application programming interfaces, storage, and then identity access management. To me, this helps us focus on where the data goes, because that's where the hackers are going. Okay, they're not necessarily going after users necessarily. They're not necessarily going after any one element. They're going after the data. And the data increasingly lives in applications, doesn't it? So we need to think about the processes that we're using. And as we upskill workers, and with this war on talent that's happening, what we need to think about is upskilling workers to think in terms of where the hackers live. And that means focusing on application programming interfaces, the processes, the requests, the calls that happen, how applications talk, from the TCP handshake to how SSL works, how HTTP works. This way, you can better automate processes and do better logging. So I think it's important to think in terms of the API issues that can happen, in terms of how impersonation happens from botnets or insufficient API authentication or misconfigurations. That's a major issue. These are the things that pen testers look for, that security monitors can find. When it comes to governance, we've seen a gradual shift and a gradual maturation process, maturity process. In 2010, infrastructure and cybersecurity were kind of combined together. And I still see organizations combine them together very well. Some do incredibly well with that. But generally, we're seeing after the 2013, 2014 attacks that happened, they realized that the idea of infrastructure, providing that infrastructure and providing the cybersecurity, gets separated a bit. By 2020, with increasing attacks, we realized that there was a need for three elements, not just somebody who provides the infrastructure and then someone who secures it, but now the provider of the infrastructure, the IT department, the security operations, they do the work, the pen testing, the analytics, but now we're seeing more of a governance kind of management perspective. So it's kind of three teams or three hats, three perspectives. That's very important to understand. To me, these are the ways that we can help get out of cowboy IT. We kind of become aware of the importance of monitoring, the importance of GRC. But in terms of addressing root causes, I think it's the talent. How do we go about getting the talent? Instead of stealing the talent, I think it's more important to do something else. I think we need to grow it ourselves. And we can do that through apprenticeships, internships. But I also would argue context-specific training, hands-on training. That'll get us out of that cowboy IT mentality. And it also gives workers the perspective that they need, not only just the technical perspective about zero trust or about monitoring. That's fine. But about the perspective of the organization that worker is working for, whether that be a government or some corporation or a nonprofit. To me, when it comes to the root cause of cowboy IT, I think it's, do we have a trusted workforce that has been empowered to handle the technologies that are available to us? And so I want to end with that kind of perspective. Now, to give a bit more context about what I'm talking about, we've done a lot of research at CompTIA over the years, and we do regular IT industry outlooks. The current one is the IT Industry Outlook 2022. It basically, the 2022 report builds on the 2021 report and basically talks about the realities that we're facing today, that the workplace is not as easily defined. That goes back to zero trust. We need more proactive security. Technical pros technical professionals need to talk in terms of business. There's an emphasis on privacy. Zero trust is important. Take a look at this report. We have it available for you. Last year, we did a report that's still, I believe, quite relevant about what cybersecurity means today. And you can check this out because it discusses trends and also ways in which organizations can become more mature, can work their way out of cowboy IT, to formalize their security, to focus on incident response, and make sure that their GRC policies are working well. So in summary, folks, we need workers that can handle complex projects, that can map technical issues and technical solutions to business processes. Yeah, governance, risk management, compliance, all very important. Security monitoring and analytics. What it means to build zero trust environments, to talk about hybrid security and cloud security, to overcome technical debt and to automate incident response and to come up with the right kinds of approaches for your organization so that you can stay in budget, but also stay in business well. So I look forward to connecting with you if you're interested in learning more, talking to us at CompTIA. I welcome that. You can join me on my LinkedIn profile if you want to contact me, jstanger@comptia.org. Also, here's a few more words about what I wrote about Cowboy IT. The article is from last year, but still, I think it's still a pretty useful way of thinking about how to get out of that Cowboy IT mentality. So thank you very much. I'm ready to answer any questions for you on this forum. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here and to talk to you about ways in which we can address some root causes, get out of cowboy IT, and move on with security. So I'm ready to answer any questions now. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, James, for your very on-the-point presentation. And I have a question that I would like to ask you now, and is, imagine that you are talking to a cowboy CIO.
Yeah.
What would you tell him? And the second part of the question is, what would you tell the business leaders?
You know, one of the first things is I would make sure to wear a good cowboy hat. No, just kidding. I think one of the first things I would do in talking to somebody who doesn't realize that they're a cowboy CIO is it comes down to trust and confidence. I think those two elements. You have to be seen as somebody that they have confidence in and that you can trust them. And to do that, I think you have to talk in terms of the business. You can't really talk in terms of security, and because you'll either come across as, well, I know better than you, and nobody likes that. The other thing that you could come across as is, overly technical, and a lot of folks, especially people running small businesses or working in departments of a larger corporation, they don't understand unless you talk in terms of the business. That's how you can basically get the confidence of that person and then move them away from cowboy IT practices into best practices. And you have to do that by kind of capturing their imagination and a little bit as you capture their confidence and saying, oh, this is somebody who doesn't necessarily know better and is a know-it-all, but has confidence, and somebody who has good best practices. And if you can show that, then you can slowly work people out of that kind of cowboy IT mentality.
Very good. So that implies also that you have, I would say, a pretty good grasp of how the business works, and what are the processes, and what's in the case of businesses, how do they make money? Or in the case of any other organization, how is it that they achieve their goals?
That's right. And I think one of the first things is in getting that confidence is that, and working with, say, somebody who's cowboy IT mentality, they most often have a very good understanding of how the business works. And oftentimes you don't. And so if you can really be a sponge, as it were, really be somebody who really soaks up information, and then you make it very clear that you're learning from them, then they will see that they have value in your eyes, and then they will be more open to suggestions and to your more almost revolutionary kind of approach to adopting security. But they'll see it as, okay, this person knows how we do business and is able to do it so that we can counter any threats, whether it be from state actors or from from ransomware or anything like that.
Okay, we have another question here, and the question is, can you talk about cost benefit of implementing your suggestions?
It's a really good question. It's usually one of the main things that you get is it doesn't, it costs too much what you're considering. And there are a couple of things. One of the first things that cost benefit can help do is, first of all, if you identify risk and you identify the either cost of existing operations, and then if you change the operations, that'll improve it. That's one thing. The other thing you can do is say, here's the cost that we've identified of a particular risk factor. So you've identified an area of the business that's very important, or an asset of the business that's very important. If you can basically quantify that and show the amount of risk, then people will understand why you're investing a certain amount of money. As far as allaying costs, a couple of things to think about. Too often people think that they have to create an entire team. And it's like, well, we're a small business. We can't afford to hire several security people. If you work through MSPs, if you work through experienced people, you can rent their expertise. And oftentimes that helps allay costs as well.
Thank you, James. We have another question, and I would like to reframe it a little.
Sure.
Besides the cowboy IT mentality that you have detected, is that only in the United States, or is it also in other countries?
That's a fantastic question. Yeah, it is all over. All over. It is not something that's necessarily native to any one region. I've seen elements of that when I've talked to people in Japan, South Africa, Europe, because those elements, even though they may not know the cowboy concept, but the elements where you are not thinking strategically, where you're thinking in terms of cleaning up the issue afterwards and technical debt, those are very universal.
Is there a distinction across generations?
Each generation has their own understanding of, or implementation of cowboy IT. That's a great question. The old school problem of cowboy IT is somebody who says, look, I have a procedure, a very waterfall, not agile, but waterfall based understanding of IT, right? That tends to be an older generational idea of managing IT. And in that, when they skip certain steps, they incur the technical debt. Newer folks will, who follow an agile understanding of IT, will still incur technical debt. It's just a little sneakier, because in doing an agile approach or doing a Scrum-based approach of project management and IT, they still skip steps. and so it's sometimes a little less easy to identify, but they still find themselves in the world of cowboy IT.
And they incur in technical debt.
Oh, absolutely. So technical debt can be incurred in a lot of different ways, but you're right. I've seen each generation kind of having their different approach. Newer generations will say, yeah, we have the security part down, but when you really start looking at it, they still end up incurring technical debt.
Certainly, IT has become even more complex as time goes by, and then you have people with 20 or 30 years in service taking the senior management roles in IT, and
right.
But what they learned at school, it was quite different to what they are facing right now. So it seems to be, and this is a very authentic question, James, there's a lot to be done at the universities right now. I mean, I don't see the change. I don't still see the change in universities that's needed that would breed a new a new generation of professionals synchronized with reality, I would say.
That's a really good point about synchronizing with reality. I like that that idea, because too often you hear it's kind of a cliche. Well, if you learned it in the university, it's already 20 years old. I mean, we've heard that before. What I think is interesting is that what happens in regards to security is that you gain wisdom from somebody somewhere along the line. Okay, you get taught about how security can work at the university. But then eventually what happens is there's some sort of technological change. The technology stack or the attack surface changes. So a lot of people were taught how IT works before the cloud became a big thing. You know, we live in a cloud first hybrid world now. So what happens is that when you get taught a certain way, if you keep that mindset, then you can find yourself running into problems and incurring technical debt and doing the cowboy IT thing. But even if you're taught in the old school way, and then you realize that you need to continually recycle yourself and resynchronize yourself, to use your term, then you're okay. And I find that continual education usually helps fix that problem. And the education can be online. There are a lot of different ways that you can do it so that people aren't away from their job too long. But to me, it's that education side that can help people understand the changes that have been happening as technology changes.
Well, that's the first thing that came to my mind as you were speaking,
Okay.
and it was the phrase "continuing education." You have to keep up with a changing world, and
I agree. Yeah, there's nothing. People talk about digital transformation, and then they try to explain what digital transformation is. Some people say it's focusing on data. Some people focus on the technology side of it. The way I look at it, there's nothing more transformational to an organization in terms of synchronizing knowledge with reality than education.
well, that's the foundation, isn't it?
It is. And it's a foundation that some people will think, well, I got taught, now I just have to go do. And what people don't realize is there's a dialogue or a dialectic between being taught and then doing. You have to do them both at the same time, or you have to do them hand in hand with each other. I think that can help remove a lot of cowboy IT perspectives, especially if that training is not just for the IT folks, that you basically have opportunities for IT folks, people in management, employees to learn, then people start understanding how they affect each other. And I find that oftentimes in organizations, when you run into security problems, a lot of times that's a manifestation of people in an organization where one, worker doesn't realize that how they affect another worker. Okay, or how management decisions affect IT or vice versa. There's that lack of dialogue. Education can break down a lot of those barriers.
And I've said before that security is a function of knowledge, because nothing that you buy in IT is secure by default. So anything that you want to plug in the network, anything that you want to do, first of all, you have to know that it has to be secure, and also you have to know how to secure it. But
That's
if
right.
you don't know that, you're toast. And actually, that's what happens when hackers have. I mean, they get you. They get you because it was something that it was not done, or not done properly,
That's right.
or not done sufficiently. Yes, education is very, very important. It's foundational. And I would ask this last question. There's also here a comment from Andres Almanza, a very good friend, that says, "Always I say, university prepares you for a long game and for the long learning person, and to be a long learning person, this must be the idea.
Yeah, you say for you must. What was that last part?
And to be a long learning person,
Yeah,
this must be the idea.
yeah. I think so. To take the long, if you take the long view of anything, what's interesting is that you have to kind of start now. And when it comes to the learning side of it, I think the more that we realize that it's not something that's an artificial process, that it's not something that you have to inject, but it's actually something that can be a natural process to the growth of an organization. I think everybody wins that, and then everybody kind of changes their way of thinking.
We have time for a last question,
Cool.
and then your final remarks.
Okay.
In companies seeking the infamous digital transformation, can you talk to the IT cybersecurity department sitting at the corporate table as an equal and not being a second-class corporate citizen?
You know, it's so often that the folks who do security and even IT are not considered a primary part of the organization. They oftentimes are considered, well, they're the people we tell to do certain things, and they do them. It's an endemic problem. It's a serious problem. It's been around for a long time. We've done a lot of research at CompTIA talking about how the best organizations engage in strategic IT, which is basically where IT is included from the very beginning, and security is included from the very beginning. I think one of the first steps to making sure that happens really has to do at the relationship level. I've seen time and time again organizations as large as some major retailers, retailers that we all know, down to very small organizations. The first step in doing that is making sure that you have a very good communication level with people at executive management. If you don't, and there are signs of not having that good communication level. Once you have that, then your IT team will be seen as something as very productive, and your security team will be seen as somebody who you can trust.
James, I have to thank you for your time and effort that you put into this presentation. And before we shut the streaming, I would like to ask you for your last remarks and wrap up the event.
You bet. Folks, it's easy to thank you again. I want to thank you for your time, and it's fantastic to be here to represent CompTIA. When I use the term cowboy IT, I like that term. It's a lot of fun to use because it helps kind of point up some of the deficiencies that often happen in terms of IT, in terms of security. But I want to end by saying I don't mean to be particularly judgmental or flippant about this. These are very serious issues, but I wanted to make sure to use a term that I think would capture people's imaginations. And I'll end with the idea that when it comes to the dialogue that happens with security, it's that opportunity to capture people's imaginations, one, about how good things can be, and then two, actually implementing that, actually taking steps, very concrete steps, to make sure that vision or that idea is a reality. And if you can do that and show that you can deliver, you'll find that you won't be skipped over. I think oftentimes people will skip the IT or skip the security function, not only because they may not understand it, but also they're worried about being told no, or that IT will take too long to make things happen. And I think the more you can show that you are the can-do party, you can move away from cowboy IT and into something that's more proactive.
Well, thank you very much again, James, and thank you to all you guys that were on this streaming, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, James.
Take care. You bet, man. Thank you.
Tenemos más contenido como este para ti, pero antes te invitamos a inscribirte a nuestro canal y activar las notificaciones. Si te ha gustado este video, no olvides darle like y compartirlo con otras personas. También puedes guardarlo para el futuro o dejarnos un comentario, nos dará gusto leerte. El Consejo Sí es una asociación civil enfocada en elevar la seguridad de la información y ciberseguridad en la escala nacional. Conoce más de nosotros y de lo que podemos ofrecerte visitando el sitio web consejosí.org.